Well, good morning, everybody. Great to see you. Good to have you here this morning. Again, I know, as Ryan said, if you are guests or maybe just newer around Fearless Church, we're so glad that you would take time to be with us today. And if you're watching in online right now, welcome to the room as well. You've come on a great week. We're actually kicking off a brand new series today that we're very excited about. It's called Don't Get It Twisted. We're going to be talking about some biblical advice for love, sex, singleness, and dating. Listen, there's a lot of areas in life where we can get it twisted. And listen, it's easy to get it twisted when it comes to relationships. And not just any relationships. We're talking about romantic relationships. Sometimes romance is challenging. In our relational worlds, right, they can get messy. They can become complicated, emotionally charged, sometimes difficult to handle. And when it comes to relationships, people are looking for answers. People all over are looking for answers. But what we often get is conflicting information from different sources, different people, even culture when it comes to navigating issues of relationship and romance. So during these weeks, we're hoping to offer up some practical advice. And I really do believe that God has some practical advice for us. God has some important insights that can help us sort out all things romance. Whether you're in love today, maybe you're questioning whether you're in love today. Maybe you had love at some point, you lost it. Maybe you're desperately hoping for someone to come and love you. Maybe you're just trying to rekindle love in some important relationship. This series is for you. It's got something for everyone. We're going to jump in wherever you are in your relationship journey. Single, dating, you might be engaged. Maybe you're newly married. Maybe you're oldly married. Maybe you've been married a few different times before. Listen, wherever you are in your conversation, we're going to jump in the middle and hopefully offer something helpful to you or to someone that you invite, because we don't want you to get it twisted. So here's the roadmap in the coming weeks. We're going to talk about love. We are going to talk about sex and singleness and dating. And so I tell you that for this reason. Parents, I want you to pay attention. Next week, next Sunday, we're actually going to jump into our second week of the series, and we are going to be talking about sexual intimacy. So next week's theme is kind of PG-13. And so we want parents to make a wise decision on how you handle that. Some of you in your homes right now, you may say, hey, with our students or our kids, they're at an age and a stage where we're not having that conversation quite that candidly, and I don't want you to have that conversation with them from the stage. And so you might want to decide that for next week. Some of you might be in the middle of that conversation with your family, and you say, yes, we are talking about matters of sexual intimacy with our students and with our kids, and you'd love for them to hear it in a certain way from the church. So we get you to decide. Next week's going to be a fun weekend. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so it really is sex in the Super Bowl. Yeah, it's two great things combined into one. That's what's happening. And we're encouraging, wear a jersey, like wear gear. You can wear hats, wear whatever. Even if you're not a football fan, just wear anything sports related. We've got some fun treats for you. We're not going to tell you about those yet, but trust me, you're not going to want to miss next Sunday. So we look forward to seeing you then. But today we're kicking off the series talking about love. It's really the big idea that sets up this whole series. Not just any kind of love. We're not talking about I love my favorite sweatshirt. It's not the kind of love that says I love coffee or I love sleeping in Saturday morning. We're talking about true love. Like we're talking soulmate kind of love. And I think people all over the place are looking for that. I think they're looking for true love. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just had a place to turn? Like if we had a jumping off point, some type of guidance, a tutorial that we could give people on how to find love in the real world. And then I realized we do. It's called The Bachelor. You laugh, don't act like you don't watch. Like, I'm not going to embarrass you and men in your watch parties. I understand. I mean, it's 28 seasons into this thing, right? Walking through the highs and lows of matchmaking. It is not too late to get on board. And if you've never seen it, the plot of The Bachelor is pretty simple. One guy, multiple women. They date over several weeks, narrowing them down to hopefully find what? True love. Man, they're trying to fast track this process of falling in love. And so what they do is they set up these moments, they set up these environments, there's these special dates, they create every best possible opportunity for two people to find true love. And truth be told, what they find is a lot of drama. But if you got rid of some of that drama, right, some of those exotic trips, you get rid of some of the production value that creates that kind of a thing, here's what you're going to find. A fairly predictable formula, actually. And it's a formula that almost all of us are familiar with. When it comes to falling in love, it's not that different what they experience than what you and I experience in the real world when we talk about falling in love. Think about it for a minute. What is the formula? What is the blueprint for falling in love? It does start here. It often starts here with physical attraction. And you know it's true. Women, have you ever had a friend that goes away, comes back and says, man, I met this guy. I got to tell you about him. He is the love of my life, and he is so ugly. No, that's not how that works, right? Because physical attraction plays a part. We're often drawn maybe towards someone or away someone initially because of how they look. And we all have different tastes and different styles and different sizes and different shapes. But physical attraction plays a part in finding true love. But it's not the only thing, certainly. We talk about emotional connection. We're looking for an emotional connection with someone. We're drawn to people when we find that spark, right? Like that one that gets us. And we're kind of referring sometimes to almost a personality thing. Maybe it's a great sense of humor. Some of you love that. Some of you want someone that's fun or outgoing. Maybe you prefer someone who's more calm and serious-minded. There's something about their wiring or their charisma, their it factor. It just speaks to you. It's the kind of person you like to be around. So physical attraction plays a part, emotional connection plays a part. And then I'm going to add this. This is the capper to the party right here, compatibility. You want someone where you have that right fit, the right fit. You look for a commonality, right? You look for a sameness around important areas of life. It might be family background. It might just be experiences that kind of bond you together. You might have the same hobbies. Maybe you look for the same interests. You share the same faith. You have a number of the same beliefs. There's just a general fit in the way that you see and experience life together. And if you stop and just think about it, just for a minute, the combination of these things right here, these three, it really does create a pretty good blueprint for what it means to find true love. And I think most people would even say this really is the answer. Like this is the answer. But here's the thing, and some of you know this from personal experience. Some of you know this by watching the experience of other people. That while these things here are very important, these building blocks of true love actually can change over time. They're variable. They're not as static as we think they might be. It goes without saying, sometimes physically we change over time. And sometimes we change our appearance. Sometimes we control it, sometimes we don't control it. Obviously, there's always the reality of aging, right? I used to be 6'2" and muscular. I was never either of those things. You know what I did have? More hair and less forehead, right? Father Time marches on. And it comes for all of us, right? Physical attraction is a variable. It can change. There are tons of things that affect emotional connection. Throughout our lives, different life circumstances, they naturally, sometimes unexpectedly, bring about different parts of who we are to our partner and in our relationship. It might be a traumatic event. We all deal with different types of health challenges. There's financial challenges. Kids jump in the picture. Life gets complicated. Emotional health, it fluctuates, it changes. All of it affects our emotional connection with that person that we love. And even when it comes to compatibility, we sometimes pick up new hobbies, we drop other hobbies, things start, things end. Life is not static, and relationships are not static. And we look at the compatibility meter, and at one point what we thought was the perfect compatibility fit isn't always as airtight as it once was, right? So is this really the complete formula? Like, that's the question. Is this really all it takes? And here's what I would say. I would say this right here, it is a great starting point. It actually is a really good starting point. These are very important pieces of the puzzle. But the truth is, love demands more than this. It demands more than a hot start. And some of you had a hot start to your relationship, and you know that's fun. But love demands more than that, and it demands more than just the right fit. Because fit is a variable. It changes a bit over time. When it comes to finding love, it's easy to get it twisted. We get to watch the highlight reels, we watch the social media, we get to watch the television shows, and we're led to believe that true love is quick, and it's easy, and it's magical, and it's unchanging. And if we could just find that perfect one, that match, our soulmate, the process would be done. We would have fallen in love, and then we're good to go. Listen, people everywhere, they're looking for this. They're looking for true love. And they want to know how to find it. But once they find it, what we really want to know is not just how we find it, but how we keep it. How do we keep it? What really makes love work? So when it comes to keeping true love, establishing love that lasts a lifetime, there is something more to it. And that's why we could all use a reminder. And today we're going to get that. Not only that, some helpful advice. Helpful advice. I said earlier, God, I think, has some great advice, some important insight when it comes to helping us sort out romantic relationships. I think God is fond of relationships. God is fond of romance. God is very fond of building healthy, lasting relationships. God is on the side of true love. I believe that he is. And so today we're going to look at one piece of advice, just one piece of advice from one of the most well-known early Jesus followers. He was an early church leader. His name was Paul. If you've been around Fearless, we talk about Paul a lot. And the reason we talk about him is because he was a writer who wrote letters to different churches. And he would offer insight and advice about a number of topics that they were dealing with. And Paul became the greatest writer of the New Testament letters that we see in our hands, in our Bible today. And Paul wrote quite a bit, actually, about this issue of relationships. It seemed to be an important issue to the church back then. And guess what? It's still a pretty important issue to the church today. So we're going to look at just one piece of advice that Paul shared with the church that met in the city of Ephesus. This is what Paul writes to that church. He says, husbands, love your wives. Love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, yes, in this section of Scripture, Paul is addressing husbands directly. In this section of Scripture, he talks about marriages, he talks to wives, he talks to husbands. But I want to listen up. Guys, if you're in the room, you're not married, I understand you're not a husband. Don't check out. Don't check out. Women, you're not husbands either. I'm not an idiot, right? Don't check out either, because there's some good advice here for all of us. Because when Paul is instructing husbands to love their wives, he's not just offering a simple directive to them, as he is suggesting to us a mindset. Paul is going to talk about a mentality. Paul is saying there's an approach that we can take when it comes to engaging our most important love relationships. He's not just offering us something to do, he's telling us there is a model that we should follow. And that's why he says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. In other words, there is a way to love that has already been demonstrated for us. Jesus has set this tone. He has given us a mindset that we should follow. Here's the mindset. A husband's love should reflect the love that Jesus had toward his bride, the church. And I realize that's sort of strange language. It's kind of a word picture. That's what Paul is creating here. So track with him for a moment. He's using this bridegroom, this husband-wife kind of relationship. It's this word picture kind of centered around a wedding. And Paul refers to the church as the bride of Christ. And the church, he's not talking about a building. The church, he's not talking about a location. He's talking about the gathering of God's people, God's particular people. So in this picture, here's what you have. Jesus is a groom, and the gathering of God's people is the bride. We have a husband and we have a wife. And Paul is saying that Jesus, the husband, has shown love to his wife, the church, in a way that we should follow in our earthly relationships. That picture is painted onto our earthly relationships. The question is, how did Jesus approach his bride? We're told quite simply that he gave himself up for her. If Jesus is the model to show us what love looks like, this is how he approached her. He gave himself up for her. One of the most powerful ways to not just find love, but keep love is to learn to love in this way, to love in this sacrificial way, to give yourself up for each other. Paul says that's the mindset. He points us to the Philippian church. He says basically the same thing to them, in all of us. He says, in your relationships with one another, what? Have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And what's the mindset? He says Jesus, at one time, he was in very nature God, but he did not consider in that moment equality with God something to be grasped or to be used to his own advantage, is what he says. And you may know this, but when Jesus showed up on this earth, he was God in the flesh. That's who Jesus was. Jesus had all power. He had all the authority. In other words, Jesus did not need to bend or concede to anything or anyone. See, Jesus was never in the wrong. He was never beholden to anybody. He owed no one anything. But in that status, in that standing, in that personhood, Jesus didn't use that power to his advantage. And instead, It says he made himself nothing. He took the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And when he was found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself yet again. Yet again, it says he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Paul's reminding the Philippian church, those followers, that Jesus willingly gave himself up for them. For the church, Jesus laid down his life for the church. He loved his bride in that sacrificial way. And from the moment that Jesus arrived on the scene, that's what he was about. That was the start of his public ministry. He was building the church. And all along the way, he dealt with the church and he dealt with others. And what did Jesus deal with? He dealt with setbacks. Jesus dealt with unfaithfulness of those people around him. Jesus dealt with misunderstandings from the people closest to him. He dealt with moments of resentment by friends and family, abandonment by the people that said they loved him. He dealt with denial, and yet Jesus pressed forward because he was about the business and the purpose of loving the church. And ultimately, he loved the church, and he loves us so much that he allowed himself to be betrayed wrongfully. He allowed himself to be brutalized without cause, and he allowed himself to become obedient even to death, to die on a cross. Even with all of the shortcomings of the church, an imperfect bride, he never wavered. He never did. He continued to give and to work for the good of his beloved because Jesus willingly gave himself up for her. And all of that goes into what Paul is saying to husbands. Love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her. Listen, when it comes to finding love, keeping love, establishing love that lasts a lifetime, Paul has important advice. He says, you got to adopt a posture. It's this mindset. And the mindset is simply this: lean into sacrificial love. That is what we have seen, and that is what we follow. Lean into sacrificial love. And I think his advice would say this, and you would benefit if you did this. It would benefit you to live this out in the good of your relationships. And I think it is good advice. In fact, I think it's great advice, but here's the problem. I think it's difficult advice. You know why? You already know why. Because sacrificial love is hard. Sacrificial love is challenging. Sacrificial love sounds a lot like sacrifice. And sacrifice feels like I'm giving something away. Because you are. Sacrifice is about giving something away, not necessarily getting something. In fact, sacrifice is all about giving something away without an expectation of receiving that thing in return. And Paul is describing Jesus' actions to them because he's saying, here's a picture. Here's a picture of how this works. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. In humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests. Each of you to the interests of others. That's sort of the working definition he creates for sacrificial love. What does it mean to give ourselves up for another? We walk in humility, and if we walk in humility, we can start to move toward selflessness. We press against some of the selfish ambition, and we look to the interests of others. And let's admit this. I will be the first to admit it. I will stand here and admit this, that it is not easy. It is not a natural go-to to operate in humility and to be selfless in my relationships. Even with the people, even with the person I say I love the most, it is not always easy to put their interests, to put his interests, to put her interests above our own. There's times when it's easier than others. Some of you may have had that honeymoon period in the relationship, right? Everything works seamlessly. She's always put together. He's always listening. Whatever that looks like for you, everything just flows well. Selflessness comes naturally. But it sure doesn't take long, right, to pull us back toward selfish ambition. It's just a lot easier to embrace self-interest. And maybe you've noticed this for you. Self-interest has a particular way of showing up when conflict arises in the relationship. And in every relationship, there are going to be challenging times. There are those moments, there are seasons, there is conflict. And there's times you don't see eye to eye on things anymore. Why? Because relationships aren't static. They're not perfectly compatible. Even if you do your best to try to stay in sync, life changes, difficult circumstances present themselves. And so in every relationship, doesn't matter where you are, there are moments and opportunities where you stand at a juncture and you get to decide, am I going to step towards selflessness? Am I going to work towards sacrifice? Or am I going to slide into selfish ambition and take a step towards self-interest? And I'm here to tell you, none of us has a perfect track record. I certainly don't. None of us is going to have a perfect track record. None of us gets it right all the time. But our response to this, like our regular response to this, not the one-offs, but the regular response to this sets the tone and the mindset in our relationship. And in our relationship, when we choose to put our partner's interests above our own, when we sacrifice, what we're really doing is we're focusing on what we give, how we serve. We're focusing on what we can give and how we can serve. But if we walk that other direction and we start to move toward self-interest, we spend less time thinking about how we serve and what we give, and we start thinking more about how they serve and what they give. And when we let that become normative, here's what happens. We start keeping score in our relationships. We start keeping score in the relationship. And it's subtle. Some of you, maybe we don't even recognize we're doing it. But instead of really looking at the ways in which we serve each other, we start to think more and more about what we're getting in the relationship. Or we become more and more aware of maybe what we're not getting in our relationship. And it's kind of a scorecard. It's like a silent scorecard, a balance sheet. I have given something, so I want to get something. I have done something here, so I would like something back in return. And it's not that you're not contributing to the relationship, right? It's just that you're making sure you get your fair share. We start paying attention to what's commensurate in the relationship. And it happens in a lot of different areas. We can score keep in all kinds of areas. I see people sometimes do it with money. Some of you may struggle with this in your relationship with money. You keep track of kind of who is spending what. It may not be the dollar and cent, but you start watching and saying, boy, I feel like she's spending more, or he's spending more than I am. And if she's going to go buy new clothes, then I guess I get to go spend more money on my hobby. Well, if he's going to go play golf with his buddies and spend money on that, I guess I'll take the money and go hang out with my friends. You see how that works? Or chores or work, and we start keeping track of who's doing what around the apartment, who's doing what around the house, whose turn is it to do this, to do this. And if he would just finish his task list that I've given to him, then maybe I would be more apt to go and do some of the things that I said I would do. We do it with relationships. We start saying things like, well, it's your turn to watch the kids. I watched the kids last time, and now you start keeping track of who's spending time where. We spent more time with your family. We need to go spend more time with my family. If he would just listen more, if he would just communicate better, then maybe I would give back. Maybe I'd be more in tune when it came to physical intimacy. Listen, there are so many ways that we can dial in to self-interest. And sometimes it results in keeping score. Now hear me though, hear this. We're all gonna have moments. We're all gonna have times in relationships when we give and when we take. That's natural. In fact, every good marriage, every good relationship demands a give and take. There are moments of compromise, and there's nothing wrong with wanting and at times even expecting value from each other, right? My sincere hope is that if you're in a love relationship right now, that you're getting something from your partner as you're giving it. But what we're talking about here is about a mindset. It's about the everyday posture, regularly letting self-interest take the lead. And if you do that, the focus of your relationship is going to become about balancing relational transactions. That's really what it becomes. And your relationship turns into this careful balance of relational transactions day over day, year over year. And that self-interest starts to creep up on you. And at some point, maybe you look up and you say, wow, things don't feel like they used to. Or you start singing the song, We've Lost That Loving Feeling. And worse yet, you'll hear couples say this, yeah, we just fell out of love altogether. And really what it started at was a moment of decision. We stand in these moments of decision. We have choices to make. What's the mindset going to be? What's the mindset going to be? We can operate in selflessness or selfishness. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. He says, in humility, value others above yourselves, looking not to your own interest, to the interests of the others. If you want to guard your relationship with the one you love, both of you should do your best to push against that selfish ambition, to humble yourself and look to the interest of the person in front of you. Again, that's Paul's advice. Love that lasts, true love that gets built. It's not a balance of relational transactions. It's really not. It's this mindset right here. It is mutual sacrifice. Two people giving themselves up for the good of the other. Paul says, watch your mindset. Consider what it would look like to follow Jesus' example. Lean into sacrifice. What would that look like in your relationship to step in that direction? What does it look like in your relationship? How do we determine if you need to build some new habits in that important relationship? Here's my encouragement as you think about this week. I'd encourage you to do a relational checkup. And from time to time, I think this is important for all of us. And you can do it in a lot of different ways. Today in particular, I'd say start asking yourself these questions about relationships when it comes to selflessness or self-interest, when it comes to giving and getting. And I'm going to give you a few questions to ask. And this is a good thing to do in any manner of relationship. You might just be in a dating relationship right now. You may be even fairly early in the dating relationship. Pull this thing out on your next date. That might freak them out. But you pull it out early. Why? Because you want to know where that relationship is tracking. Maybe you want to see, is this headed in the right direction? If you're newly married, I would say pull this out often. Stay connected. Start building good habits early. And if you've been married for a while, it's always good to check in and say, hey, have we drifted anywhere? Has anything gone off the track? So start here. Just ask this question. How am I being humble and serving well? Think about maybe that most important relationship in your life. Where are you being humble? Where are you serving well? You may have some ways, and I hope you do. Circumstances, particular areas, maybe there are certain pivot points where you know what? I do serve him well there. I do serve her well there. It's good to know that. It's good to note that just for your own encouragement. But more than that, there are times if you are able to serve in one area of your relationship well, learn from that. Figure out how you can leverage that area and start applying it to other areas of your relationship where maybe you're not doing that quite as well. So start with the positive. What are you doing well? But then ask yourself this question: what ways am I keeping score? Are there ways that I'm keeping score? Are there different parts of my relationship that I'm focusing more and more on what I'm getting than maybe what I'm giving? And maybe you're not sure where to start. You don't know how to go about doing this. Here's what I'd suggest. Look at areas of conflict. Like if you have pinch points, I don't mean major blowouts. I just mean little pinch points in your marriage that you see, or that relationship that you see regularly. If you have recurring tension, start there and see if there's any scorekeeping going on. If you're starting to build a heart of resentment toward that person that you love, or maybe you are continually dialed in on unmet expectations, and that's what rises to the surface every time you think about a certain portion of your connection, that may be a starting point. Ask yourself, am I starting to keep score here? Am I walking away from the ways that I'm serving and giving, and I'm starting to dial in on more of what I'm getting or not getting from my partner? Because that's going to prompt you to ask this question here: is there a step I can take to become more sacrificial? Is there a step I can take to be more sacrificial? When those decisions happen and you have to respond to each other, what can you do in that moment to make sure that you take a step in the direction to build the mindset that says, I'm going to serve. I'm going to serve, and I'm going to put your needs above my own. And one of the next steps for you might be to actually talk about this with that person in your life. Again, I'd encourage you, if you start here, let this be an internal thing. Start there. Let this be an exercise for you. Start by mining out what is in you, what is happening in that relationship. But just when the time is right, sit down together. Answer these questions. Talk to each other about the way in which that person across the table serves you well, loves you well. Tell them all about it. Be honest about those areas where you're starting to see scorekeeping taking place, or where some of those expectations are a bit off. Have a conversation around that, and then together try to talk through how can we be mutually sacrificial toward each other. Listen, what would happen? What would happen in your romantic relationship if we took Paul's advice? I wonder what would happen in any relationship if we did everything we could to really push back against that selfish ambition. Like if we were not willing to just kind of give when we received something, or maybe give more if we got a little something more, but if in humility we were able to sacrifice, like truly sacrifice in key moments and times, what would happen if we put the interests of that person above our own? Here's what I think would happen. I think we would see relationships moving and trending in a better direction. I do. I think they would naturally trend in a better direction. I think you would find that you start to overlook small offenses and misunderstandings a lot quicker. I think if you knew that that person that you loved was willing to sacrifice and give for you, and they knew that you were willing to sacrifice and give to them, I think trust would be built. I think goodwill would be built and maintained. I think apologies might flow a bit quicker. I think forgiveness might start to rule the day in areas where it's currently not. And I think we would safeguard some relationships against falling out of love or watching it dwindle slowly, one relational transaction at a time. Listen, there's people everywhere, and they're searching for love. They're searching for true love. But we can't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. See, love is not just something we fall into. Contrary to popular opinion, love is not something we just fall into. And honestly, love is not something, if we fall into it, that we just keep falling into every day. We need to build love. And we build it a step at a time, a decision at a time. And a huge part of what makes love work and last is our willingness to regularly, consistently sacrifice, give of ourselves for the good of the one that we love. And I'll tell you what, if we get it right there, if we get it right when it comes to love, that affects a lot of other areas in our relationship. And that's why we're going to pick it up again next week. When we say don't get it twisted, we're going to be talking about love, sex, singleness, and dating. Let me pray for us.